Hi guys, welcome to day one of the Lewis and Clark expedition. We're going to go through a series of Google slide presentations and rather than doing the textbook. So give me a second to present my screen. You can go back and see all of this, by the way, afterward, and you're going to need to, particularly for the last part, which you'll see in just a second. All right, the Lewis and Clark expedition. After the president had given Meriwether Lewis the go-ahead to be the person that was going to be in charge of the expedition, he had asked William Clark to go with him, and William Clark had agreed to. They knew that they had a couple of things that they were going to need to do. Here's a map of where they ended up going. But President Jefferson wanted them to do some fairly specific things. He wanted them to explore the Louisiana Territory, which is what he had or the country, I guess, had just bought. He wanted to find a water passage to the Pacific Ocean, very similar to what the Mississippi River is between Canada and the Gulf of Mexico out to the Atlantic Ocean. President Jefferson thought that having something similar to the Pacific Ocean and eventually to China and to India would be extremely helpful. And it would, there just didn't happen to be such a thing, but they didn't know that at the time. He said he wanted a journal of the expedition. Besides Meriwether Lewis and William Clark, there were 7 other men that kept journals for a grand total of 9 for a couple of reasons. Number one, different perspectives. Record different things that are important to them. Number 2, if something were to happen to another one of the journals, the entire thing wouldn't be lost. I saw all of those journals bound together in Portland when I was with the middle schoolers this year. Really interesting. They were also supposed to make new maps of the area. That was particularly William Clark's forte, so he was meant to do that. And then keep record of all the new plants and animal species that they would find, which was Lewis's job as well as some others. The men who were chosen to come along were specifically chosen because they were either soldiers or sailors, or they had been fur traders and knew other languages and could help to translate. A couple of notables, if you look on the screen. One was York, who was the slave of William Clark. They had been he had been owned, quote unquote, by Clark's father, and then given to Clark upon his father's death. By all accounts, it seems like York was treated like Clark's friend, but he was also on the expedition because he was Clark's slave. He didn't have a choice; he had to come along. All indications from the journals are that he was delightful to be around. The second one is the guy that you guys are all writing from the perspective from, Pierre Crozat. He was not a soldier. He was French Canadian and also Creole, which is French and Native American kind of in combination. He was also a really good fiddle player. He was blind in one eye. That's going to become important later on. But he was on the expedition as well. And then our last person is John Ordway. He was the top sergeant, and if Lewis and Clark weren't available to make a decision, he was like the third in command. He also kept a journal. The expedition took off on May 14th of 1804 from the Missouri River, specifically from St. Charles, Missouri. The picture on your screen is the Gateway Arch, which is in downtown St. Louis, Missouri. And the reason it's there is because it's close to the place where Lewis and Clark took off. It's not specifically the place, though. St. Charles is not that far away. But if you ever go to visit St. Louis, I would highly recommend that you go visit the Arch. It's a cool place to see. They started up the Missouri River. They were on the wrong side of the Continental Divide. The Continental Divide is the place where the dividing spot, where water either goes east out to the Atlantic Ocean or west out to the Pacific Ocean. And if they were on the wrong side of the continental divide, which meant that they were going to be rowing up the river continuously every day, and they were long days. Sometimes the expedition made 4 miles in a day of mileage. Sometimes it was all the way up to 30. It really depended upon what the conditions were like. If you were on the expedition, you had a couple of things that you could be doing. You could be searching for plant and animal species. Again, that was probably going to be Lewis. You could be making maps, probably Clark, although there were a couple others too. You could be hunting or fishing. They didn't take nearly enough food for everybody to eat all they needed. So hunting and fishing was a pretty continual process because everybody needed to have at least 2 meals a day. And they were spending all their day rowing and or poling, which is when you kind of like rowing, you put your pole in and you walk it back and you push. So that makes you hungry. You need to have food. So somebody was either hunting and or fishing or gathering berries or roots or whatever, pretty much constantly to keep everybody fed. Or you could be on the rowing crew. My shoulders hurt just to think about it. So they went on at least at first. One night, pretty early into the expedition, about a month and a half in, one night, Sergeant John Floyd complained of a belly pain, and he died overnight. And he was buried at what's called Floyd's Bluff now. Now we think, reading the journals and knowing some other things, that probably what happened is his appendix burst. Your appendix is like about the size of your pinky. So mine's about the size of my pinky. Yours is about the size of your pinky. And it's an organ that we don't seem to need anymore. But if you look in your gut, it's right in the area of like your kidneys. But every now and again, it gets infected, and if it bursts, all that infection goes in your bloodstream, and that can be a real problem. And that's what we think happened to Sergeant Floyd. He was the only person actually to ever pass away, though, in the entire expedition, which is pretty miraculous. We're going to do this several times, it looks like. There we go. Okay. The expedition was not going through land that was untouched. The Corps went through the land of multiple Native American tribes. And the journals of all of the tribes that they went through the land of, everybody was pretty friendly. They traded back and forth. They traded things back and forth, always giving them the peace medals, or at least the chief. But they would also send things like meat. The journals talk about that one group sent watermelon back as a thank you. The only group that there was an issue that's recorded were the Teton Sioux. You say it Sioux, not C. I know it looks like Sioux, but you say it's Sioux. And basically the chiefs wanted more. One of the chiefs in particular wanted more gifts than he had gotten. He'd gotten several, but they couldn't give him everything they had because they had other nations that they were going to be going through. And so the Sioux they had more numbers and they had more weapons, and they took advantage of their position, and which you can understand. And they took one of the expedition's boats. So in response to that, because there were 3 boats and then several canoes, the other boats pointed their guns at the tribe, and even pointing guns versus arrows, the Teton Sioux by far had more warriors, and the whole expedition could have just ended right there if they had chosen to fight. But the Chief Black Buffalo, who was not the one who wanted all the gifts in the first place, but Chief Black Buffalo called off the standoff and he let the group go, which again was very kind of him. He didn't have to do that. Remember, the expedition was on the Native American tribes' land, not the other way around. So they were gracious to let them go through. But that was the main issue of any nation that the expedition went through. That's where we're going to stop for today. But you're going to watch again from the documentary from National Geographic, and watch from 4 minutes and 33 seconds to 13 minutes and 36 seconds. This presentation is in your Google Classroom, so you can just link directly to the video from here, and you can find it again in Google Classroom, or the link is also in Google Classroom. But again, you're going from 4 minutes and 33 seconds to 13 minutes 36 seconds. There's nothing to submit for this particular, for right now, but we are going to use this information later on. So enjoy the documentary, and I'll catch you next time.